Great. So this is our organisation, Asian Women Writers, and I'm the founder and director. The organisation was founded at the beginning of this year, so with the intention of supporting women writers of any Asian heritage, anywhere in the world. I'm also a writer myself. I have poetry published just in small presses, and I'm working on my debut novel. And yeah, I've been working with Saida on this event. And Saida, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Ассаламу алейкум, добрый день. Меня зовут Саида, я родом из Ташкента и работаю в издательской сфере в Лондоне. Я очень рада принять участие в этом семинаре рядом с Irum и рассказать немного о роли литературного агента. Хотя мы будем вести все на английском, я рада приветствовать вас на русском языке и надеюсь, семинар принесет вам много пользы и удовольствия. Hi, my name is Saida. I'm originally from Tashkent, and although we're doing the session in English, I was delighted to introduce myself in Russian first of all. I work in the publishing industry as an assistant at a literary agency in London. I'm delighted to be taking part in this workshop alongside Irum, and I hope you find it useful.
Great, thank you. Let's move on to the next slide. So this is just the purpose of the organisation. We provide mentorship to unpublished writers mainly as an introduction to the publishing world, which can sometimes seem kind of confusing or mysterious. But through the mentorship scheme, you can be introduced to either a literary agent or an editor and a publisher, actually at a publishing house. And the intention is to essentially give confidence to unpublished writers, give them a sense of the path that you have to take from being someone who writes just by yourself in your own room. How does that turn into a book that you might see actually in a bookshop? So it's a global program. Currently our mentors are split between the UK and the US, but all of our mentors have a global outlook. So they're willing and happy to be engaging with cultures all over the world and writers who are based in any country. You'll see when we come to actually look at our mentors, they've been sort of invited individually from leading literary agencies, and they've all expressed an interest in looking beyond the sort of conventional subject matter. So when it comes to new cultures, new ideas, new ways of looking at the world, that's who these people are. That's what they're interested in. And we're lucky enough to have the support of major publishing houses. So we have editors from HarperCollins, as well as one editor from Simon & Schuster. So this is a map which we have on our website. It might not be familiar to you because we've removed all the internal borders. It's just an image of Asia without any of the component countries marked out. So this is how we define and use the word Asia. It's anyone from anywhere on the continent. We don't mind if it was your mother who left, I don't know, Palestine to go to the US, or whether you've been living in China most of your adult life. We have writers who were born in the West, who were born in Asia, and who have moved around in between. The list that you see on the left here, these are the countries that we currently represent in our writers. So Mauritius, China, Philippines, there's such a range. And we aren't interested in creating a kind of common identity between these very different cultures. We're just interested in exploring the whole area, regardless of borders, as you can see. We've included, if you're eagle-eyed, you'll see two countries on the left that are technically considered to be part of Africa. So that's Morocco and also Mauritius. But Morocco and all of Northern Africa, a lot of it has a strong Arab population, a strong link to Arab heritage and culture. So we include it for that reason. And the same for Mauritius. There's historically been a very well established Indian community there. So we aren't sort of precious about these demarcations. We just want to bring exciting new stories to the fore. Okay, so in terms of the writing that we're looking for, it's traditional publishing, which means it would be a book that you'd see in a bookshop, as well as probably, hopefully, a digital copy and also an audio version, ideally. So we deal with the two categories you can see here, fiction and non-fiction. A novel, which we typically see is coming in at 70,000 to 100,000 words, although there are obviously variations within that. Something like sci-fi might be longer than that. Something like romance might be shorter than that. But we cover all genres. We have mentors that specialize in particular genres. So we've deliberately invited someone who works mostly with sci-fi and fantasy, for example. We have somebody who loves commercial romance stories. So we're very clear about covering as broad a range as possible. So whatever book you're working on, whether it's to do with Uzbekistan, to do with Central Asia, or it's just a simple love story about two people living in a house and there's no mention of any sort of broader culture, we're equally happy to read your work. Beyond genre, fiction can be broken down into the age levels. So Saida says she writes children's books. We have a couple of people who work with what's sometimes called middle grade. It's kind of the younger children's section, but also young adult. Young adult is a sort of a blurry category because you can sometimes get young adult crossover. That's also something that appeals to adults as well as young adults. But we currently don't do very young children picture books, but hopefully that's something will change in the future. Most of our mentors do focus on adult fiction. But if, as I say, if you have some other project that you're working on, just get in touch and we'll see what we can do, see if there's somebody who's interested in working on it. For non-fiction, there's a bit more variety in terms of length. It just depends on the nature of your work. But typically you'd probably be looking at 70,000 words as a ballpark figure. We do ask that you have at least 10,000 words already written in order to apply to the program, just so we can get a sense of your writing style and how the project might progress once you're working with a mentor. And as it says, we cover all subjects, including cookery, which would be something I'd love to see actually. So far we've had subject matter experts who have links with academia or who are working sort of quite senior levels within their industry. So they have very detailed knowledge about a particular topic from that experience. But equally, if you're just somebody who knows a lot about something that's very interesting and it's not backed by a university or your job or anything like that, we still want to bring it in to the range that we have to get a bit of variety going on that front as well. So currently we have we have a professor at Cambridge who's writing about what it means to be the other, which just means somebody who's different, but she's doing it from a very in-depth philosophical point of view based on her academic research. And we have another non-fiction writer who works in the charity sector and is writing about the colonial backdrop to philanthropy. And again, that comes from her professional work. So what do we mean when we say mentoring? That it can mean many different things. Because we have such a range of mentors and we're so open and flexible, the meaning can change for each writer. But to start with, when you're applying, we offer these three categories that you can see here. So consultation is just a meeting with an expert, whether a literary agent or an editor, to discuss any aspect of your writing project. It might be that you're in the early stages and you just want to talk about where it could go, the direction that you want to take it. Often these are really good just to get confidence in your idea. You might think it's a brilliant idea, but not know how others respond to it. So it's really great to get an industry perspective on that before you embark on writing the whole thing. And then a submission assessment, which is also a one-off meeting that you'd have. It would be an hour-long conversation based around in this instance, the first 10,000 words of your novel, or based on the proposal that you've put forward for your non-fiction work. So a submission in the US is called a query, and it just means when you put together your initial materials to send to a literary agent for real when you want to be represented. So the journey to becoming published, we'll discuss it a little bit later in more detail with Saida, but you typically would need a literary agent to represent you, and you would be signed with them, and they would love your book and want to represent it and to send it out to publishers. And then at that point, the publishing house, via an editor and probably a whole team of salespeople, they would decide whether or not they want to buy the rights to publish that book. So the first step in the traditional route to publishing is to get a literary agent. And in order to do that, you need to submit, as it says here, typically the first either 3 chapters or 10,000 words of your novel, along with a letter, like a cover letter that you might write, similar to what you might write when applying for a job, giving a broad overview, and then a synopsis, which gives a detailed summary of the plot, what's going to happen. So this is crucial to getting on the first step towards publication, which is getting a literary agent, and it has to be sort of very well thought out and kind of perfect. So getting advice at this early stage can be really, really helpful. And we've had some really great success stories so far with this, which we'll show you later on. And the final one is mentorship, which is a longer arrangement of 3 to 4 months, where you meet with your mentor once a month to discuss 10,000 words of new writing. So for the submission assessment, you would need to have your book completed if it's a novel. And for mentorship, you'd only need the first 10,000 words written because you would work with your mentor as you continue writing your book.
Okay. So thank you, Irum, for covering sort of the submission guidelines. I'm going to talk to you a bit more about what a literary agent actually does and the role of a literary agent within the publishing industry. So a literary agent essentially represents a writer and their written work. So once you submit to a literary agent and they love the potential and the idea of your novel or a non-fiction work, they would sign you on as an author, as a client, and then work really closely with you in order to help to make the work the absolute best it can be. So a novel, for example, could go through quite a few editorial drafts and changes before an agent then submits that work to publishers and editors that they work closely with to hopefully find the best publisher for your work. And then the publisher will pay the author and then help to turn that book into an actual physical product that you would usually see in a library or a bookstore. And a literary agent supports a writer in every aspect of their career, from negotiating the contract with the publisher to making sure that the author is paid, and really nurturing them through the whole career and helping them with their next idea, the next work, which is an extremely rewarding relationship to have. And that kind of brings us on to what a literary agent is currently looking for in the English market and in terms of Asian literatures. So in the English market at the moment, we can see a lot of translations of classics from the region, such as poetry. We see a lot of non-fiction work focusing on the Silk Road more widely, not least the really popular Silk Roads by Peter Frankopan. And we see finally seeing first translations of novels by Hamid Ismailov and Chingiz Aytmatov across in the English market. So we're seeing a lot of these narratives that are driven by Soviet influence and politics. But what we want to see more of are narratives, especially Central Asian narratives, that are diverse and cover a lot of genres. So not simply literary fiction, but as Irum said earlier, mythologies, romantic fiction, a young adult and middle grade, and crime fiction. The English market is seeing such a huge demand for diverse literatures, so it would be amazing to see narratives from Asia and Central Asia that are covering the genres across the spectrum, and non-fiction on a huge range of subject matters, from politics to cookery, as Irum mentioned. And a literary agent would primarily be looking at works in English, but there are agents across the UK who also have a second language and would consider works in translation as well.
Great, thank you. So here's the long list of mentors that we have. As I say, there's a split between the UK and US, and we're lucky to have such a range. Obviously, these names might not be familiar to you already, but they are a combination of very large, very established agencies who typically might have a TV and film department within them, and have maybe 100-year history, and then also the smaller boutique agencies, which can be just as good. They can be super dynamic and really responsive to what's going on, but that might be just 3 people in one office versus sort of 200-300 people in the bigger agencies. But so we have a good mix between the two. They both have advantages depending on what you're looking for. So when you're thinking about who you'd want to represent you as a literary agent, the most important thing that you can do is research to know exactly who you're targeting when you write to people. There's no good sending out the same email to 50 people and seeing what happens. You would need to, just as you would with a job application, research the individual agent as well as the agency, and then tailor your query letter specifically to them based on, ideally, other books that they've worked on, their current interests and what they're looking to sign. So a typical agent might sign maybe 3 new authors in a year. That's kind of normal. So you can imagine how many emails and submissions they're receiving, but from that they have to be very selective as to who they choose. So the more that you tailor your application, the better position that you'll be in. And then the third column here, publishers and editors. That's kind of the fact that you have mentors at this stage of the process kind of skips a step in terms of agents. But obviously, if you've been mentored by somebody at a publishing house, that puts you in a very good position when it comes to writing to hopefully gain representation with a literary agent. Our main supporter in that column is HarperCollins. And then we have below that, you see lots of imprints, which are part of the broader HarperCollins group. And those imprints specialize in different areas. So Harper Voyager is known for sci-fi and fantasy. They're the leader in that market. And then as you go down, you have romance-focused imprints, and you have crime-focused imprints. So the industry itself is very tailored and very specific. So you want to be thinking in those terms right from the beginning. Where will your book sit in this sort of vast landscape of options that are out there? As I say, we've had amazing support. We're a voluntary organisation. To apply, you don't need to pay any fees at any point. And the Madeline Milburn Agency and Trellis Literary Management have both been incredible in volunteering their time. We have about 4 or 5 mentors from each of these agencies. I see them as kind of similar in that they both have a kind of a boutique feel to them, but the agents who are there are very experienced and very successful. They have New York Times bestsellers, Sunday Times bestsellers, that kind of thing, despite being quite small in size relative to some of the other agencies. So the difference being that Trellis is based in America and Madeline Milburn Agency is based in the UK. And this is just a quotation from Madeline Milburn. Just to give a sense of just how enthusiastic agents are to hear new stories. If they have something new, it's unique, it's original, and it's going to do really well when it comes to actually selling the book out in the marketplace. So don't think that just because you don't see something like your book out there, it isn't wanted. It's the exact opposite. If it isn't out there, then we want to hear about it because it's something new. And yeah, Madeline Milburn and Trellis, they've both been super supportive
Yeah, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the agency that I work at. C&W Agency is based in London, and we are a very small boutique agency within a much bigger company called the Curtis Brown Group, which is amazing because we have our own team and our own way of working with the writers, as well as support from a larger company in terms of bigger opportunities for the clients that we work with. So we're a literary agency, first of all, with an international outlook. We really want to represent authors from all over the globe with different perspectives and new stories. We have a translation rights team within the C&W Agency who sell our clients' works to publishers across the globe. We've recently had an amazing success story of one of our titles which has now sold in over 30 languages and territories, which is amazing and gives such huge opportunities to those writers. As an agency, we're committed to uncovering new voices and talent. And I want to say that we are very much focused on supporting our clients through their whole careers. We work very closely with our authors on editorially. As I said earlier, some of our debut fiction work can go through several drafts before we send it to the publisher because we're so committed to making a writer's work the absolute best it can be. And we're really keen to support our authors through their whole career and in every aspect of their profession. And some writers that we represent with especially a sort of Asian perspective include Priya Atwal, who wrote on Sikh Empire a couple of years ago and is currently working on a similar non-fiction project within that space. We have literary fiction writers such as Rowan Hosea Buchanan, who is of Japanese, British, and Chinese American heritage. As well as young adult writers like Sabina Khan, who's writing young adult fiction with characters that she herself didn't see in the market. So as Irum has said earlier, we're really keen for fresh perspectives and new voices from a huge range of genres, where we represent everything from literary fiction to non-fiction with big ideas, as well as crime fiction, romance, fantasy, young adults. So there is definitely a home for your work at C&W.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The fact that it's then sold to multiple territories afterwards. So it's sort of creating that global sense of a global writer. You can still get your book, even if you're with a US agent or a UK agent, that book will still be available around the world, hopefully.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So this is just, we've got a few examples of writers who've had sort of success with the mentoring program. As I say, we started at the beginning of this year. So far, we've helped close to 40 writers in one way or another. And these are a few examples of people who've gone on to sort of have success with their book. So Ryoko Hiroza is a Japanese-American writer of historical fiction. Her book is called Tokyo Technicolor. So she was born in New York, but she's lived in Tokyo and Nagoya. And her mentor was Alison Maleka of Trellis Literary Management, who specifically deals with foreign rights. So she's very knowledgeable on the process of getting a book from one country to another. But she helped Ryoko throughout the process of submitting to literary agents. So Ryoko had written her book, but was kind of the next stage was something that we could help with. And she's now represented by another mentor of ours, who is a literary agent called Amy Elizabeth Bishop at Distill, Godric and Bure, which is a quite large established US literary agency. And then later this month, going to be sending that completed manuscript out to publishing houses to hopefully sell the rights to publish it. And this is what Ryoko said of her experience. As I say, the particular mentor arrangement for each writer just varies, and it's different depending on what the mentor wants to do and what the writer wants to do. In this case, it was a submission assessment that Ryoko had with Alison. And this is from Rieko's perspective, it just gave her confidence when it came to sending her submission package out to agents. And Alison helped her review the list of agents, which is so crucial. So you should have that big list. There are hundreds of agents out there. You want to narrow that down to maybe 5 to 8 agents who you know are looking for your genre, and who have possibly worked with similar sorts of books to yours. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but if you personally feel that there's a link, that's something you could highlight in your letter. Say, I love what you did with this book. I think it has a similar atmosphere, similar setting, similar tone to my book. It's really helpful to draw out those comparisons. And to have advice from a mentor will help you really make sure your letter is as tight as it can be. And Alison was lovely and continued beyond the initial assessment to provide encouragement and support through answering questions. And as Rieko says, the publishing industry can be difficult to navigate and hard to access, although I think it's improving, but sort of it still can seem a strange place. But we were able to provide her the support that she didn't feel that she was alone throughout that process, because the process can take 6 months plus, depending on how slowly things are going. So you need to have a sort of a plan and be quite focused on that. And this is another writer of ours. This is Nishima Lennon. She's Mauritian, and her book is called The Engagement. It's a psychological thriller, so it's in a different genre. And she was drawing on her personal experience, firstly at university, where she studied psychology and criminology. And then in her professional experience, she quite amazingly worked in psychotherapy within the prison service. So when she's writing about psychological thrillers, she really knows what she's talking about. And her mentor was Daisy Watt, who was an editor rather than a literary agent. So she is based at Harper North, which is an imprint of HarperCollins, based in mainly dealing with the northern North England, but is also interested beyond that. But through working with Daisy, she improved her manuscript over a number of months, and responded to Daisy's editorial notes and suggestions on how to improve what she'd written. And she's now signed with Harper North, and Daisy's now her editor rather than just her mentor. So I believe Nishima actually doesn't have a literary agent, so it is possible to approach certain imprints directly. But as I say, the traditional route is literary agent first and then editor. But Nishima's debut will be published in October, and it's available now to pre-order on Amazon. And that's a really lovely story to see her go from, she's currently a primary school teacher, and now she's super excited that her debut is available on Amazon to buy. So this is what Nishima had to say about Daisy's support. Again, it's about encouragement and advice and gaining confidence in yourself as a writer. If you're a new writer, you might not feel, or you might not know whether your writing is good enough to be published, whether it's yet at that standard. And just a little bit of advice can sort of help you change your own trajectory. So she's grateful to the program and to Daisy, who again is like a really enthusiastic, really keen supporter of the program. And yeah, see, in terms of the rest of the quotation, she's just really happy and really surprised. And we're so proud of her. This is the first book that's being published as a result of the program. But I've just heard this week that we have another one with Hachette, which is another of the big publishing houses, a writer of ours who's Malaysian. She's been offered a publishing contract there. So the possibility is there. It may take a while. It may be that this is your mentorship with us is one step in your journey, or it might be that it takes a couple of months and you're published. But either way, it's just about opening those doors and hopefully making you realize that this is all possible and it's all within reach. So yeah, finally, before we sort of go to questions, it's just about how to apply. So as I say, it's completely free of charge. All we want to see is a sample of your writing in different forms. So it's only open to writers who are unpublished. It may be that you have self-published in the past, and that typically means you sort of used Amazon to kind of upload your work and to make it available in digital form. That's kind of okay, but the work that we see would have to be brand new and unpublished in any form. And then we would also ask that you don't yet have an agent, because we're seeking to still reach out to people who aren't yet part of the sort of literary community and who need that extra sort of helping hand to get there. Currently our submissions are open. So our autumn submission period began at the beginning of September and will run to the beginning of November. That's mainly because around Christmas time just isn't a good time to submit to editors or literary agents anyway. So we want to get all our writers hopefully placed with a mentor during that time. And everybody does receive a response. That doesn't always happen when you're sending out your work to agents or publishing houses. So it may take a while, but you will hear back from us whether you've been accepted onto the program or not. And it takes a varying amount of time depending, because usually we have to be in contact with several mentors to find the best match and to place you with the best partner. There are more details about the form of how you apply on the website, so please do check that out. But as I say, for fiction, we are open to the idea of a collection of short stories, because there are some literary agents who work with those and accept those, especially in the US. Those are sort of quite popular, but typically it will be a novel that we're looking at. And as I said, in order to apply for any of them, you would need a minimum of the 10,000 words of the beginning of the novel. So typically 3 chapters, your query letter, which is explaining who you are, why you want to apply to the program, and crucially, tell us about your book. We don't want a half or maybe a whole page about you, and then 1 sentence about the book. The main purpose of your query letter is to give what's called a blurb of your book, which is what you might see on the back of a book if you go into a bookshop. It's just a paragraph or so that summarizes the themes and the major plot points that are interesting. And by that, I don't mean every plot point. I just mean maybe there's a murder, or maybe we don't yet know if somebody's going to return from war, or whatever the story is. We want to get a sense of what's going to happen in the book, but you don't have to, as I say, tell the whole story and spoil the ending in your query letter. And then the third component in a separate document is the synopsis. And in that, you do spoil the ending. You tell everything bit by bit by bit. So your query letter should be persuasive and make the mentor and the literary agent want to read more and to open the book. The synopsis is kind of the opposite, in that it's very factual. It's very sort of methodical, and it goes through from the beginning of the story all the way through to the end. And it doesn't leave you guessing as to what's going to happen. It tells you how the story progresses. And the purpose of this is to give the literary agent a sense of the overall structure of the story. Does it work? So you can have a novel that's from a brilliant writer that starts off really well, but then a quarter of the way through, it kind of loses its way and it has no sensible structure that can bring it to a natural end that's satisfying for the reader. So that's the purpose of the synopsis, is to kind of give a map of the overall story and just give confidence that the story is going in a direction and it will come to a sensible conclusion. And that synopsis is only 1 page, so it's still a bit of a challenge to get everything in there, but it's a really important part of the application process. As I say, for the submission package, you will need to have completed the novel. But otherwise, we just want to see what you're working on. And for nonfiction, we require a 10,000 word writing sample. This could be from elsewhere. It could be from a journal article that you've written. It could be from just a blog that a lengthy research blog that you've been working on, anything to give us a sense of how you write and who you are as a writer. This does not need to be part of what will be your final nonfiction book, because nonfiction is dealt with slightly differently. Nonfiction books are kind of sold on the basis of proposals, which is in the place of a synopsis, you'll have a proposal which will set out, typically chapter by chapter, what your book will contain. So because a nonfiction book typically requires a lot of research, a lot of time sunk into it, they don't require you to have written the whole thing, because there's a lot more focus on the content, like the factual content within the book, rather than the storytelling of a novel, for example. And then the query letter is quite similar. Give us a sense of who you are, why you should be writing the book. What is it that gives you a unique insight into the subject, and what will you be sort of bringing that somebody else maybe wouldn't have. And then finally, that's just the website that you can go on to find out more. I'll just show you what I didn't show you before. So these are our mentors. As I say, it's like a lovely group of people who I've been in touch with personally, and who were approached because they've expressed an interest in sort of unusual stories, like stories that aren't already out there. So these are the US people. If you click on each, you'll get a detailed sense of what they're interested in. So this is Alison, who we discussed before, and all of these details about the types of books that she wants to work with. And this will be different for each person. So do take the time to be quite sort of specific about who you're working with. I've especially been interested in working with Asian mentors. So we have a few. So Sonali here is Indian, and then Natalie is Armenian, and then these are the UK mentors that we have. And this covers a whole range, from commercial fiction. So that means typically it can include genre fiction. So it could be like a thriller or a romance novel, whereas literary fiction, which Saida mentioned earlier, is kind of sometimes more poetic. It's more about the style of the writing, and it's less about an exciting plot that's kind of fast-paced and focused on the plot of the novel. It may focus more on the characters and their views of the world. So there's a subtle difference between literary and commercial, but we cover both sides here. So if you're writing something sort of very serious and something that you consider to be literary, we could match you with one mentor, and then obviously we've covered the commercial side of things as well. And yeah, and these are the publishers and editors that we have currently, and we're always expanding these. So as I say, if you feel like your work wouldn't naturally match with somebody here, and maybe you're working on a picture book, which is something we're thinking about expanding into, then do still get in touch, and then we'll hopefully be able to find somebody who can specialize in what you're writing. And then yeah, that's it. If you've got any questions, yeah, very happy to hear from you now, but also just send us an email at this email address, and then we'll get back to you there. I think we maybe have to wait for Saida to return. I'm not sure. Let's see.
I'm just going to re-add Saida to the screen. Thank you.
Great. So yeah, it's an interesting conversation happening in the chat. So Iftikhar says, like in humanities, women writers from Asian backgrounds have earned themselves a very impactful presence on the literary scene. I think that's true. I think also it's nice to see the range of writers that you see. And also like as I sort of mentioned, the different types of immigration, the different types of connection that we have between Asia and the West to make it super interesting. And also when English is is part of the education system in a particular country. So for example, India is the obvious example. It's quicker and easier to access these stories. And then if that's not the case, you then would bring in an element of translation as well. So there's lots of different forms that it can take, but it's, yeah, I think the variety and the impact is great to see. And then, yeah, Saida, you mentioned about literary agents. Do you want to maybe expand on that?
Yeah, about the absence of literary agents in Uzbekistan, do you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what do you see are the challenges there, and do you think?
Yeah, I think a little bit, as was discussed throughout the festival as well, and I know Sophie talked about it in her opening speech as well, we just need to expand the publishing community in Central Asia and to hopefully allow for literary agents' presence in those communities as well. It's just bringing those opportunities to the writers there to allow those voices to be read across the world. And hopefully once a country has a literary agent, that will allow for better connections with the English markets in UK and US, because a lot of literary agents work collaboratively. So for example, at C&W, I mentioned Sabina Khan earlier. She has a US agent as well as our UK agent. So, and our translations team would usually send a work to a specific agent in a different country as well. So again, it's about the growth of the publishing industry in the Central Asian market, which will hopefully happen if this festival is taking place, and it's just a stepping stone to making that possible.
Yeah, exactly. Just building that network of co-agents.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you for your presentation. I mean, I loved every slide, and that's what I'm saying. We lack, even on concept level, we don't have the practice. And in the earlier session, Alesia mentioned on copyrights session, Alesia mentioned that in Uzbekistan, we just changed 50 years deadline or time limit to 70, and that's something. And the invited speaker also said that we just starting having courts on copyright issues. That's also something. We just started having that kind of incidents, right? When people apply to court and say, my copyright are, there's a violence and everything. And here, the same thing on this level, when we talk about literary agents, even on the concept level, it doesn't exist. And I think even when it starts happening, it will be for brand new projects, brand new writing pieces, because now everything that has been published, that has been republished again and again, and publishers are being, they're those authors who have been popular ages ago, and their works have been republished again and again without them being aware of it. And that is a case when there was no literary agent between them and a publisher to take care of all the matters. But that's just an issue. But I think Uzbekistan has so much potential. I'm sorry, I won't take much time and maybe read some questions. And one of the questions, the first question is not mine. How do you decide which writers to pair with which mentors?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's quite a sort of organic process. So I know each mentor individually. I know what books they've worked on previously. With a writer, if they're accepted, it's on the basis of the quality of their work. And hopefully they've written a really specific query letter that will tell me where they see their project going. So they may say, I really admire this other writer. I'm like, okay, I can see that matching with this agent. That's the kind of similar sort of vein of work that they have previously worked on. So it's a very individual, thoughtful process. And that's partly why it may also take a little while if you don't hear back straight away. But the reason we've continued to expand our mentors is that we have a broader range to offer, because it might be that I love a writer's work, I think it's brilliant, but the mentors that we currently have don't match perfectly. In that case, I have then invited further mentors to join so that we can get a better match between those.
Thank you. Very. And one more question. What has been your favorite part about starting the program and being able to help Asian writers?
Yeah, it's just been really, it's been brilliant from the beginning. I was kind of surprised at how successful it was, but I think it's been driven by the natural enthusiasm that there is in the publishing industry. I thought it might be a bit more difficult because the Asian, I mean, as we saw with the map, Asian isn't one thing. It's not easily packaged or easily presented. It can be sort of confusing for someone who might be only familiar with European culture. So I thought there might be a bit of like resistance that I'd have to overcome in terms of explaining things, but that's just not been the case at all. I've had agents coming to me saying, can I become a mentor, please? Because it's, if you're a literary agent, you don't want to be working on the same old book, the same old story that's been heard 100 times. You want to be the first person to bring something super exciting. So Natalie Edwards, who I just highlighted on the previous slide, she's American and Armenian, but she's recently signed a writer who is also Armenian and is talking about Armenian identity. And if you think, like, when's the last time you heard of that in a bookshop, is that, you know, it's just not something you've come across. So the best thing has been the enthusiasm of the mentors, but also those success stories that we saw there. So we have 2 publishing contracts in our writers, but also 2 of our writers signed with other mentors. So there's a sense of community being built up there that you also see on Twitter, if you want to follow us there. Just writers supporting other writers is really amazing to see.
Thank you. There are some more questions, but unfortunately, we ran out of time, and some of them were my personal. And because I know you guys, I can contact you. And I'm just on the other side. I'm opening the website, scrolling it down. So I think this is just a very good beginning of the conversation, but it will go on, and maybe it will lead us to new meetings, online, offline. Across Asian countries, including Uzbekistan. Yay, it's coming to Uzbekistan too. Thank you so much for your expertise, practice, and sharing information with us, with all the audience today. And not saying bye and see you soon.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.